Well, hello there. I didn't see you come in. Make yourself at home. Have a drink. While I give some attention to some underappreciated characters and storylines that I personally love. And I hope you grow to love as well.
Hey there, everybody, and welcome back. Today we are reading Swamp Thing number 141, and just a little catch up on what happened in the last issue. We began our journey into the Grant Morrison, Mark Millar run of Swamp Thing, which started with Alec Holland waking up as a human man from a bad nightmare where he was going around as this swamp monster who had a family. So basically everything that happened in the last, 139 issues was all a dream. And it was a dream that was caused by hallucinogens that Alec Holland is researching in the middle of the rainforest. And he is actually a scientist that is doing some research on hallucinogens, and he is kind of obsessed with the idea of man and plant being able to talk to each other through the use of plant-based chemicals. And in issue 140, we did see him go to a local shaman and take some drug that was made from plants. And he got super high, where once again, he was thinking he was this Swamp Thing monster. And at the same time that was going on, back home in Louisiana, there was a Swamp Thing that was born. But this one is not happy, but it does seem to remember things about its life, like it remembered Chester's house. So it goes there first, but of course Chester has moved to New Orleans, and there are some new occupants in the house, and this new Swamp Thing ends up killing at least one of those people without so much of a word being said. So it seems that this might be either like the uncontrolled Swamp Thing, like without Alec inside, there is no direction or way to guide its emotions. So that is where we left off, with this Swamp Thing murdering at least one person inside of Chester's house. So first things first, with issue 141, we got the cover. We see a very horrific and large Swamp Thing is looking out at us very evilly. He is standing in thigh-high water, and he's holding a dead man who he has obviously attacked because his hands are covered in blood, and there's blood leaking out into the water. And we also see that this is written by Grant Morrison and Mark Millar, with art by Phil Hester and Kim DeMolder. And as we turn to the first page, we see a familiar face that we haven't seen for a little while. It is our old buddy LeBeau, the Cajun man that boats around the swamps and helps people all the time. So like usual, he's in the swamps, he's pushing his boat, and as he does, the narration says, "The morning air is sharp and uncomfortable. Dead lilies float like corpses writhing with insects. Sullen waters, sluggish and viscous, part before him, and he listens to the dark chorus of bullfrogs, fear burning in his gut. A shiver runs down his back, and Jean LeBeaustrie doesn't look around when he hears the giggling in the bushes. In the darkest part of the swamp, he pauses. A monstrous black bird flaps overhead, momentarily eclipsing the sun. LeBeaustrie feels his skin crawl and moves on. Below, in the green tank of swamp water, something stirs and rises." And as we turn to the second page, we see that Swamp Thing is bursting out of the water and actually smashing apart Jean LeBeaustrie's boat. And also on this page, we get the name of this issue, which is Bad Gumbo. So when LeBeau's boat was smashed, he was not harmed initially. He falls in the water, and as he tries to stand up, he says, "Bon Gumbo, is that you, Bon Gumbo?" But instead of an answer, the only response he gets is the claw of this new horrific Swamp Thing coming out of the water towards him and grabbing him and then dragging him down to the bottom of the swamp. Then we cut to Terrebonne Parish, where all the other Cajuns live and hang out, and it's like their little community. And there's two guys sitting on the water's edge, just playing some chess, talking to each other, as some local kids play soccer around them. And they have this really cute little white dog with them, and all of a sudden it starts barking. And then from the water, we see this bad Swamp Thing come out onto the bank and approach the dog. And then as we turn the page, we hear the dog cry out in pain, and then a thud sound. And one of the men says, "What was that?" But he is answered by the carcass of the dog smashing down onto the chessboard they were playing on. And the man whose dog it was says, "Francois, get out of here! Take the children!" And he just happens to have a shotgun nearby, so he picks it up and he takes aim at this bad Swamp Thing that is now running towards him. And he takes a couple shots, but as we know, bullets don't do anything to Swamp Thing because you can't kill a plant with bullets. And as the man sees the bullets aren't doing anything, he yells back to the older man, "For the love of God, Get the children away from here. So the old man does, and he raises the alarm in the entire village. So now everybody is running away from this scene, and one of the women running says, Bon Gumbo, he's gone mad. If you don't remember, the Cajuns call Swamp Thing Bon Gumbo because he is the elemental that, grows all the food for them in the swamp that they harvest. So they make gumbo with that. And when things are going good with Swamp Thing, the gumbo is good. But as the woman just said, it is not going good right now because as this entire town runs away from Swamp Thing, vines shoot out of the ground and wrap around everybody and then pull them apart. And there are a couple people that are able to escape with their lives, at least for now. And one of them is yelling, Get Jean! Somebody find Jean! And of course, they're talking about Jean Lebostri, who was already attacked by Swamp Thing. And as we turn the page, we actually see that somehow he was able to live through his attack because he's pulling himself out onto a bank from the swamp. And as he does, he says, No, I don't understand. What has happened to you, Bon Gumbo? I will not let you hurt my wife. I will not let you hurt my children. And as he says that, we cut back to Swamp Thing, who is, in fact, at LeBeau's house and beginning to attack LeBeau's family. So just like in the last issue, it seems this horrific Swamp Thing is going by the memories of our Swamp Thing and is going to all the places it remembers from that Swamp Thing's life. So originally it went to Chester's house, and now it is going to Terrebonne Parish and Lebostre's house. And we see as Swamp Thing bursts through the wall, LeBeau's wife is trying to protect their child with a frying pan, and she's yelling, Keep back, you bastard! Keep back or I bash your brains in! And as this bad Swamp Thing continues to break through the wall towards her, all of a sudden, LeBeau appears, and he says, Get away from my family, Bon Gumbo! And we see he has a torch in his hand. And as Swamp Thing turns his attention to LeBeau, LeBeau stares him down and says, I'll burn you. I swear I destroy you with fire. But just as he says that, vines shoot out of the ground and wrap around the arm that has the torch. And it seems like it actually causes LeBeau's arm to catch fire and then wraps around it so LeBeau's right forearm and hand are immediately engulfed in flames. And as LeBeau's wife watches in horror, this bad Swamp Thing comes up to him and punches Jane through the chest. And she yells out, Jane! Oh my God, Jane! And then bad Swamp Thing throws LeBeau to the ground and gets on top of him and proceeds to beat LeBeau to death with his fists. Then we cut to New Orleans at Dawn's house, and the phone is ringing and we hear Abby say, I'll get it. And as she answers, we don't hear the other side of the conversation, but we hear her say, Hello? Yeah, this is Abby Cable. Who's... Oh, Jesus. Is that you, Tefe? Where are you, sweetheart? What's wrong? Oh, shit, Tefe. What are you trying to say? What's wrong with Daddy? Then we get a panel of no talking, but she's just looking very worried. And she continues, He's two daddies now? But one's good and the other... Oh, Jesus. And as Abby stands there kind of horrified, we see Dawn come in through the back door and say to her, The Mercedes is all fixed, Abby. What's the matter? Another crank call? And as the receiver falls from Abby's hands, she says to Dawn, It was Tefe, Dawn, my little baby. She told me her daddy was coming to kill me. And then she runs to Dawn, and Dawn says, Jesus, Abby, I thought we'd heard the last of all this weird stuff. And she gets kind of mad at this and says, What? Do you think I make this shit up? And Dawn replies, No, of course not, Abby. And she hugs him and says, Oh, Jesus, Dawn, it's all catching up with me again. And as Dawn hugs her, he says, You've stopped taking the tablets, haven't you? Dr. Pym told you the bad dreams would start again if you stopped taking the tablets. And this, of course, was not the right thing to say, so Abby kind of pushes him away and says, Get your hands off me, Dawn. You're covered in oil. And then she runs into the next room as Dawn yells after her, Abby! Then we cut to South America in the jungle, where we see a fairly crazed-looking Alec Holland walking around, and there's some narration over these panels that says, I haven't slept for 5 days. I'm too scared to close my eyes in case I wake up somewhere else. I've never felt so unreal. I kept myself awake last night with the pills and black coffee. I told Lawrence what happened during my session with Roberto and how much it upset me. He suggested I pay a visit to the shaman again today. Perhaps talking things through will make me feel better. So Alec goes to Roberto's house, and as he walks in, we see that Roberto is playing a Sega Game Gear. And Alec says to him, Please, Don Roberto, I need to talk to you about what happened yesterday. And Roberto replies, Just a moment, Dr. Holland. I am almost through to the next level. Few see the spiritual nature of these games. They miss hidden meanings. Maybe you would like to take part also. And a somewhat manic Alec says, no, thanks. And Roberto looks up from his game because I guess he's got to the end of the level and he says, you are troubled, Dr. Holland. What would you like to ask me? And Alec replies, I don't know. I just need to know what those visions meant. I feel as if I'm on the brink of something so enormous here. And Roberto says calmly, go on. But Alec just blurts out, what am I, Don Roberto? What on earth am I? And as if he's trying to calm down everything and just do things slowly, Don Roberto reaches over and grabs a can of Coke and opens it, and he says, you are not a man, Dr. Holland. Of that much I am certain. I reflected on last night and had a dream which might interest you. In the dream, I held the hand of a white-haired woman. She was very beautiful, but she was crying. I think something was coming to kill her. She gripped my hand very tightly and screamed for help. The woman was screaming for you, Dr. Holland. And remembering from his dreams, Alec Holland says, Abby. Oh, Jesus, Abby. And Don Roberto adds, without your help, she is going to die. Then we cut to some time later, and Alec is telling Anne, Lawrence, and Michael what Don Roberto said to him. And of course, they're a little confused because they thought this was all some dream that Alec had when he was, high on drugs. So Michael asks, I don't get it, Alec. I thought you said Abby was just part of your trip. And Alec replies, she was, Michael. Or at least, I think she was. The hallucinations of Louisiana were so vivid, I feel like I know every inch of the place. I'll go crazy if I don't check this one out. And Anne says to Alec, come on, you were practically comatose for 3 weeks. Don't you think traveling back to the States so soon is kind of crazy? And it seems like Alec gets offended by this because he says, yeah, I guess I better hit the road before I come to my senses. Then Lawrence asks, how are you getting to the station? Is Paco giving you a ride? And as Lawrence asks this, Alec has gotten up, he's put his rucksack on, and he begins to walk out of the building, and his 3 friends follow. And once they're outside, Alec points to a Jeep that looks like it's definitely seen better days. It has a broken windshield, and the tires look like they're about to fall off, and there's vines growing off of it. And Alec replies to Lawrence, he offered, but I think I'll be safer on foot. So they all get to the tree line of the forest, and as Alec is about to walk into it, Anne runs up to him and gives him a big hug and says, be careful, Alec. It's a long trip back to the States. And Lawrence jokes, saying, take it easy, Anne. Long trips are Alec's specialty. And Alec laughs at this, and then he walks into the forest saying, I suppose so. See you around, people. Take care. And as he walks off into the jungle, Mike and Lawrence watch him walk away, and Michael says, weird guy. I hope he finds what he's looking for. And then Anne hears a noise and she says, shh, can you hear a noise? And Mike says, what noise? I can't hear anything. And Anne replies, I heard a giggle high up in the trees. It sounded just like a little kid. Then we cut to a panel of the jungle, and we can't see anything in the trees, but if you remember, LeBeau also heard something giggle in the swamp just before Swamp Thing attacked him. Then we cut to Alec Holland as he makes his way through the forest, and as he walks, he thinks, what's happening to me? I seem to have affected some kind of permanent change in my consciousness, and it's taking all of my strength to resist being overwhelmed by this strange plant mind I've apparently accessed. I don't want to think about what Roberto said. I know he was just talking in symbolic fashion, but I cannot shake this dreadful feeling that I've done something to myself. Something irreversible. And we see as Alec is walking, he's not just walking through a jungle, he eventually reaches one of these logging camps, and apparently no one cares that he's walking through where all these large machines are working, because he just walks past them and there's no people to be seen. And then I guess just past where the machines are, there's like a little village where all the workers live, and there we can see like a bar and a place you could eat. So as Alec walks past all these machines and into this town, his narration continues. Perhaps this is some kind of chronic mad inhibition. The monoamine oxidase system usually works to metabolize hallucinogens and render them inoperative. But it may be that my ingestion of powerful tryptamines following an illness has resulted in some kind of chemical imbalance. This kind of mad inhibition can last for 2 weeks before it reverses itself. And then there's the alternative. What if I've accomplished some kind of unusual bonding of plant-derived harmine molecules and the adrenaline base in my human DNA? All this goes back to Terence McKenna's research, but do I dare believe it? Have I really become some new form of life? Or is this just a psychotic delusion? And where the hell am I going? So as this narration is happening, As Alec walks through this village, his face is all panicked and he's super sweaty, and he starts to see things that might not be there. Like in an alleyway behind the restaurant, he sees two creatures fighting, and I say creatures because they are definitely not any animals that I've ever seen. They look like two dog-sized monsters, and one of them is killing the other. And seeing this just makes Alec more manic. Then we cut to New Orleans, where Abby is sitting on the couch watching TV, and she's looking pretty sad as she holds the rose that Matthew the Raven left her in the last issue. And we see Don come in from the room behind her, and he says, "Abby, are you feeling a little better now, honey? It's getting late, sweetheart. I'm going to bed. I just wondered if, you felt like coming too." But Abby doesn't move, and she just says, without looking at him, "I'm not sleepy." And then Don goes over to the couch and sits next to her and says, "I'm sorry I upset you earlier, Abby. I really am. I just want you to know that I'm here if you need me." And Abby looks at him finally and says, "I'm sorry, Don. It's just all the weird things that have been happening. I don't know what's real anymore." And Don says, "I love you, Abby. That's all that matters. We'll fight this thing together." And then they hug each other, and as they do, we hear a report on the news say, "Trying to control the hysteria in a state no stranger to horror after the brutal murder of a young New Age couple. All exits are blocked as terrified locals try to escape the wrath of the Louisiana swamp monster." So it sounds like police have found the couple from last issue that was staying in Chester's house. And as Abby hugs Dawn and she hears this, she says, very worried, "Oh, Jesus." But it seems like maybe Abby was the only one who heard that news report, or at least got anything out of it, because Dawn just stands up after the hug and says, "I'm going to bed, Abby. Come up when you feel ready." And as he walks away, Abby says, "Dawn?" And Dawn replies, "Yeah?" And Abby says, "I love you too." Then Dawn goes to their room. Then we see Abby. She kind of has a mischievous look on her face, like she's about to do something. And we see her sneaking into the garage and getting into the car. And as she adjusts the rearview mirror, she looks at herself and says, "It's me it wants, Dawn. Just me. I don't want it to hurt you too." And then she drives away. Then we cut back to Alec, who's still in the logging village, but now he has gone into the local bar, and he's sitting on a stool talking to the bartender, and he's saying, "I need to get back to the United States. Can you tell me where I can get a bus?" But the bartender doesn't answer him, and he says, "A bus. Excuse me, do you speak English? I need to get to the United States of America." But the bartender just looks at him blankly and doesn't say anything. But then a shadowy figure behind Alec says, "Only one way out of here, Dr. Holland. Soul Train's coming soon. But it's a one-way ride, Dr. Holland. Think you're brave enough to climb on board?" And Alec looks over his shoulder at the man talking and says, "What? How do you know my name?" And the man answers, "They call me Blake, Dr. Holland. El Senor Blake. I've been waiting here for a long time." So Alec walks over to his table and he says, "I said, how do you know my name?" But the man doesn't answer again and just continues saying, "They say the soul train's driven by demons and angels too. Makes the round trip from heaven to hell and don't stop for nothing." So you might have been able to guess, but I'm pretty sure that this is just another dream that he's having. Everyone in this bar is super weird and covered in shadow except this one man, Senor Blake. And in front of him on the table is a bottle of tequila. And we can see something floating inside of it, but you're just supposed to assume it's the worm. But as it zooms up on the bottle as this man is talking, we see what looks like a very early stage human embryo floating in it. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say that this is definitely some sort of dream state, especially since Senor Blake is talking about some weird soul train. So Alec asks the man, "But this train, will it take me back to America?" And the man smiles and says, "Train takes you any place you want to go, Dr. Holland. You step through that door now, and there be no turning back." So Alec walks past the man towards the door that he was pointing to, and as Alec approaches, the door just opens on its own, and smoke billows into the room ominously. But Alec doesn't even seem to notice this, and he just turns to Blake and says, "What about a ticket? Will I be able to buy one on the platform?" And Senor Blake answers, "You don't need no ticket for the soul train, Dr. Holland." So Alec walks through the door, and he walks straight onto a platform of a train station, which wasn't there before because this was like the front door of this bar. But Alec just acts like this is a totally normal thing, and he goes to sit down on a bench to wait for the train. Then as he's sitting there, all of a sudden he feels something in his palm, so he turns his hand over to look at it, and a vine begins to grow out from the center. But it doesn't shoot out to like kill him or grab him or anything. It actually forms and grows into like a giant green egg sac that then bursts and a large bug flies out from it. And the insect looks like a cicada, but a giant one. And of course, as all this is happening, the look on Alec's face is just of pure terror. And as the bug flies away, he says, "Jesus Christ!" And then the plant in the center of his palm recedes back into his hand, and I guess disappears altogether. But Alec doesn't really have time to process this because the train arrives and the usher yells, "All aboard!" So Alec gets on and he finds a seat, and as he sits down, we see he's got a very worried look on his face, like he's really scared because he's looking around the train at the other passengers, and they're all in silhouette, and they all have red, evil-looking eyes, and they're all staring at him. And that, my friends, is the end of the issue. So we'll have to wait till next time to see what happens with Alec and his crazy trip, and also if Abby is going to be safe from this new evil swamp thing. So if you guys have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email me at planes, trains, and comic books, all one word, @gmail.com. And remember, until next time, stay swampy.